This is Microeconomics, Chapter 2, A Choice in the World of Scarcity, Professor Wagner. These are the topics that we're going to go ahead and discuss within this chapter. We're going to talk about budget constraints, production possibility frontiers, and also confronting objections to the economic approach. Choices and trade-offs are, okay, you have the example of college here. Maybe something a little bit more concrete would be, okay, you need a new car. Do you buy a used car? Do you buy a lightly used car? Do you buy a brand new car? And so basically each of those will have some type of trade-off. The cheapest option would obviously be the used car. However, the trade-off might be in the fact that it needs repairs more often, as opposed to, let's say, the brand new car, which is kind of the opposite extreme. Well, that'll probably be under warranty for some number of years, but the trade-off will be more output for cost. If you're going to have a lease, the lease will be more expensive, or you'll have new car payments for a number of years, typically 5 to 6. Individuals making choices, and that based on their budget constraint, that's basically an expansion on trade-offs and choices. Let's say a customer needs a good, so basically he has a limited budget in most cases, and so he has to decide, which good does he need more, usually what takes place, as opposed to what someone wants. But that's not always the case. But let's say someone absolutely needs water, so they'll probably be much more willing to pay for it, as opposed to buying pistachio ice cream. That would be more of a want. So if there's any kind of strain on the individual's budget and they don't have disposable income for the pistachio ice cream because they have to buy the water, they're going to make the rational decision to buy water. This is a graphical depiction of trade-offs. And so there are two products in this mix. Alphonso has a budget of 10, burgers cost 2, and bus tickets cost 50 cents. So if you take a look at the graph, burgers, he could buy a maximum of 5 burgers at point A with that $10, or 20 bus tickets at 50 cents a piece with the same $10. So Alphonso has to kind of decide for himself, which combination is best. Because the budget constraint is $10, any point above that line is probably, well, we're just going to say that's out of reach. So that's out of reach. Anything along this line or anything underneath this line is a possible combination, and it stays within the budget constraint. In conjunction with the last slide, the notion of opportunity cost. So what does someone have to give up to obtain what he or she desires? Okay, for Alphonso, maybe a burger, would be pretty much in the offing if he is terribly hungry. So his priority would probably be 1 or 2 burgers, but somewhere around anything greater than 2 burgers, that might be not such a need, as opposed to the number of bus tickets he has to buy. So he might allocate, let's say $4 for the hamburgers, and then he's going to use the rest possibly for bus tickets, or maybe not all the money that he has allocated at all. Opportunity cost is typically represented by price. And sometimes the price is measured in dollars, but it doesn't always accurately capture the true opportunity cost, because time is also a cost. So if you're going to college, you would not only have to be concerned with the tuition of college and books and other associated equipment needed to learn, like a computer or other items needed for that class. There's also the fact that you got to sit in that classroom, take it, actually take the time to learn. And then after you're done with class, you'll have to take the time to do the assigned work. So time and money are both parts of the opportunity cost of going to college, for instance. Kind of an opportunity cost conundrum. These are all examples. Buying versus leasing a car. Some people intend to drive a car forever, and so they'll be inclined to buy. There'll be others that'll be inclined to lease a car because they like a new car every few years. They may be more concerned about their image, so they want to be seen, in a later vehicle. Investing in different ways. Basically, that's also an opportunity cost. Okay, and the opportunity cost in that case is, safety versus risk, and they have to trade off one for the other in terms of the type of investment. Going out to eat, preparing food at home. Well, going out to eat, okay, there's some time opportunity cost, but then you get to avoid making the mess at home and taking the time to cook. And then there's preparing food for at home, which would probably be cheaper, but it would also create more work on the back end with, let's say, cleaning dishes, cleaning up the mess, and the actual time to prepare school. And then there's walking or taking public transportation. That's very situational. Walking, basically, if it's shorter to walk, then you'll probably just walk. If you take public transportation, that's probably outside the distance that you want to travel on foot. So those will be trade-offs: time, money, and let's say speed. These are three terms that you might want to know for the test. And so our marginal analysis will, examine benefits and costs of choosing a little more or a little less of any particular good. Utility is also interchangeable with the words satisfaction, usefulness, or value one places on any particular good or service. And then there is the law of diminishing marginal utility, as with the burger example, Alphonso. Probably after the second burger, the marginal utility of the third, fourth, and fifth would go downward, meaning that, Alphonso will be full at some point, and the marginal utility of an additional burger will be pretty much next to none, as a good example. Sunk costs are another thing that people and firms alike have to contend with. Sunken costs are basically costs that you go ahead and pay for items that you pay for, but there's no way to recapture that money directly. And so the example, a firm might find it hard to give up on a new product that's doing poorly because a lot of money was spent in creating the launch, of the product. So the lesson of sunk cost is to ignore past errors and make decisions based on what will happen in the future. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that whole mistake, because you have to recognize that maybe you didn't do enough research in making a decision to make that poor product. Maybe what the situation calls for is more due diligence on whether the next product you buy is actually going to be worth the offset of the sunken cost. A couple more test terms: production possibilities frontier, or PPF, and that's a diagram showing the efficient combinations of two products that an economy can produce given the resources it has available. And the slope of the PPF shows what the opportunity cost would be along that curve. So what we see here is a PPF graphically depicted. And so the two items are healthcare, education. And anywhere along this curve, falls within the opportunity cost. So let's say society decides to put all their effort in producing healthcare units. That would be point A. If the complete emphasis is on education alone, then it will be point F. And so whoever is making the decision will have to decide, what combinations along this line that they can do. So maybe point C is good. They need that, C worth of health care. And so you would have a line that would look something like this. So basically this line here and this line straight down. So the new XY coordinates are the new allocations for that particular PPF possibility. Once again, you can choose any combination, of healthcare and education. You can do any point along the line. What I want to say about any point along the line, okay, is an optimal allocation of all the resources. So all the resources are being used at the point that you use some combination that lies, on top of that line. However, if you're underneath the line, that's also a possibility. There's no one saying that you have to allocate all your resources. The area above the line is a space where the combinations are beyond your ability to let's say spend or create resources. Okay, law of diminishing returns. So basically, additional increments of resources producing a good or service is added, and then the marginal benefit from them will probably decline. So the law of diminishing marginal utility is a more specific case of the law of diminishing returns. So when we talk about marginal utility, once again, we're talking about satisfaction. Think on the burger situation where Alphonso might be good after one burger, maybe he'll be even better after two, but a third is one too many. So there's a diminishing marginal utility, which is also part of the law of diminishing return. In respect to the PPF, as you move along the curve from the left to the right, you'll notice that there are pretty large gains in education to a certain point on this curve. However, probably somewhere around here, the amount of gain, particularly this last part, will be a part of that diminishing return. So as you reallocate more toward education, you might reduce health care to a point where that might create some problems. A couple of understanding of these two terms for the test is budget constraint and PPF. What you want to remember is that a budget constraint is a straight line, and the PPF is a curve shape because of the law of diminishing returns. So slope is different at various points on the PPF. With the use of calculus, you can actually, figure out what the actual two numbers would be, but that's not really part of this course. Okay, this is a graphical depiction, and so the graph at the left would be considered a budget constraint, and then the graph to the right would be considered a PPF. Another couple terms, productive efficiency versus allocative efficiency. And so productive efficiency speaks pretty much to producing more of one good without decreasing the quantity of another good. So any choice inside the PPF is productivity and efficient because you're not allocating all the resources. And allocative efficiency is when the mix of goods represents the mix that society most desires. Back to the PPF on healthcare and education. All choices along a PPF like B, C, and D are productive efficiency. So basically, along here, you use all your resources that you can allocate for results that fall on the curve. However, point R, you notice, is underneath the curve. That's not particularly efficient. So the productive efficiency is not optimal. PPF often falls into the trading of goods between nations. The PPF and the comparative advantage. So these are a couple of definitions. So countries typically will produce something that they're particularly good at producing, that they have access to the specialized labor and resources to create that product. Different countries have different opportunity cost, and that's based on a number of factors such as the specific good, climate, geography, technology, or skills. And so the term comparative advantage is when a country could produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another country. So very specifically, you want to know this definition. So here's a graphic illustration of the last slide. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about Brazil and the US. They both produce sugarcane and wheat. Brazil is real good at producing sugarcane, probably because the climate, fits that better than, more so than wheat. On the flip side, the US is much better at producing wheat than sugarcane. So Brazil has a comparative advantage with sugarcane, and the U.S. has a comparative advantage in the production of wheat. Reality is that people, firms, and society really don't behave in terms of economic thinking. However, it is reasonable at a first approximation to analyze them with a tool of economic analysis. So we can actually study the behavior of, let's say, people, the firm, or a society using economic tools. It goes on further in terms of objections to economic approach. People and firms of society should not act that way. The economics approach has the 4 bullet points. So portrays people as self-interested, seeks to describe economic behavior as it actually exists. It'll use positive statement, and this is based on fact. And then it will try to avoid normative statements, basically a subjective, question of opinion. And so they need to take what is ethical and morality out of the picture. The invisible hand is something that was spoken of in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. This was written in 1776. He was considered one of the first people to describe economics as a pattern behavior and something that could be quantified and qualified. And so, these bullet points, it talks about, thoughts that he had within his book. Consumers will encourage businesses to offer goods and services that will meet their needs. It also is possible that a broader social good can emerge from selfish individual actions. And self-interest in economics does not necessarily imply that in all aspects of one's life that they're thinking in terms of self-interest. End of chapter 2.